homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm, or welcome back. Today we are making a shaved kale salad that is just perfect for this time of year. It's seasonal, it has lots of seasonal ingredients, it's a little bit sweet, it's a little bit tart, and it's just perfect for holiday tables. And I got this recipe from Crowded Kitchen, and minor modifications as one does. What inspired this was a couple of things. One, in our local grocery store parking lot, there was a guy with a truckload of pomegranates, and I love pomegranates. I lived in California growing up, and they were very common. My dad had several trees, and we had a tree when we lived down in Arizona, but they are not frost hardy, and so it is too cold to be able to grow them where I am here in Southeast Washington, Zone 7A. Theoretically, we're right on the edge of being able to pull it off, but I've tried it and have not had good success. And so whenever I see pomegranates for a really inexpensive price this time of year, I always grab them. And in this case, I spent $20 on a big bag of pomegranates. And so I've been having a lot of fun playing with them and throwing them into different dishes. And then secondly, I don't always grow every single thing that I cook in my kitchen. Sometimes you just see a good deal and you go for it. And so I was at my grocery outlet before Thanksgiving, and they were selling whole stalks of Brussels sprouts. I'm not a huge Brussels sprout eater. I don't love them cooked. I will eat them cooked, but they're not my favorite thing cooked. I've come to understand that I really do love them raw. And so this is a shaved raw Brussels sprout. And it was just really fun to actually have them on the stalk because you don't usually see them that way. They tend to hold way better and they're fresher when they're that way. And for, I think, $5, I bought this huge stalk of Brussels sprouts, and we've ate them in 2 or 3 different dishes over the course of the last couple of weeks because they're in the cabbage family, and so they hold super well. So shaved Brussels sprout fall slaw or salad. Let's get started.
So have you guys ever tried to grow Brussels sprouts? They are a long season crop. You need to start them in the spring, and then they're anywhere from 100 to 120 days. And I've done them once just because somebody gave me some seedlings. One of our local farms that's been here for a really long time mentioned that she just has given up trying to grow them because they have so many problems with aphids. And because they're such a long season crop and there's so many little nooks and crannies in there, it's virtually impossible to keep the aphids from getting really, really bad over the course of the growing season. I did try a couple of plants because somebody gave them to me, and I never got them to really bulb up to any size, even though I planted them at a pretty reasonable time. And they're frost tolerant. They're related to kale and broccoli and cauliflower, so they're all in the same family, but can be quite difficult to grow if you're not in the right environment. So just taking these off the stalk, cutting off the little bit of woody end on the ends here and trimming off any spots that are bad. But they're so fun. They're just like little mini cabbages. And those leaves on the outer side, as long as they're not discolored, they're perfectly fine to eat, and they'll get crispy, kind of like a kale chip if you roast them. So just throw them in a salad and they're completely fine. I'm using my mandolin here to slice these, and I'm checking thinness because I want these to be really thin. I could have done this with my food processor, but the slicing blade on my food processor is quite a bit wider than this, and I wanted these to be really papery and thin. Mandolins are tricky. You can definitely cut your fingers. I did not cut my fingers when I was making this recipe, but I made this a second time for a potluck that we went to, and I did catch my thumb the second time. So just be very, very careful when you're using these. They come with finger guards, but that also makes it very hard to handle, so it's just tricky. After I cut my thumb, I ended up cutting the rest of them the second time with just a knife. I think this is a total of 12 ounces of Brussels sprouts, so a little less than a pound. And this is a little bit tedious, but it doesn't take that long, and it's very nice when you can get them really, really thin like this. And then I'm just fluffing everything up. I want confetti, essentially, and so I'm trying to get a little bit of air in there. And it's surprising how much room they take up. So here's one of the pomegranates. Have you guys ever seen that viral video of the guy who shows how to take apart a pomegranate? And he basically segments it like an orange and makes it look like the easiest thing in the world. Pomegranates aren't actually shaped that way. I don't know what that video is about. Maybe it's a different variety in a different country. But the bottom of them is not a straight line. The bottom of them is a big wad. And so they're kind of messy to take apart. The trick that they tell you is to put them in a bowl of water because those little white bits will float and the seeds of the pomegranate will sink. And so you can pretty easily sort off the whiter skin parts because they'll float to the top of the water in your bowl. A little bit messy, but not that bad. And I've been eating pomegranates for years. And so I've pretty much got it down in terms of how to take these apart. So here's our beautiful pomegranate seeds. And I'll put those in a strainer. And then the recipe called for candied pecans. Obviously, you could use any kind of nut you wanted in this. I think pistachios would be really good. Almonds would also be excellent if you didn't want to use pecans. And I've made this recipe twice now, and I really don't think that the candied pecans are necessary. There's a lot of sweetness in this from the pomegranate and from the dried cranberries and from the apple. And so this was like a whole nother added layer of sweetness that I just don't really think was necessary. If I made it again, I don't think I'd bother candying these. But if you've ever candied nuts, it's really easy, and this is a great Christmas gift. Just, make a big bowl of these and give them as Christmas gifts. So sugar, brown sugar, some spices, some cinnamon. Recipe is always in the description, guys. And then we're just going to cook those until that sugar melts and kind of reaches basically a candy stage so that they're going to be crispy when they cool off. A little bit of salt, nice sweet and savory here. And the recipe called for 2 cups, and then it only uses a cup in the recipe. And so I don't know why they bother having you make 2 cups when you don't use all of them. So pouring those out while they're hot onto a piece of parchment paper. They're very hot at this point, so be careful with your fingers because you can easily burn yourself on that hot sugar. And just spreading those out to cool and to crisp up. And then I'm using a whole Honeycrisp apple here. You can use whatever kind of apple you've got on hand. And actually using something like a Granny Smith might be welcome if you're going to use candied pecans because it would help cut some of that sweetness. It took me years to figure out how to cut up an apple. I used to always use one of those apple segment things and finally just decided that this was way easier to do it this way. So 1 whole apple. And then I've got 3/4 of a cup of Parmesan. What are you doing? This is Aber, who's decided with his wet, muddy feet to tell me that he wants some breakfast. So 3/4 a cup of Parmesan, 3/4 of a cup of dried cranberries, sweetened cranberries, and then our nuts go in as well, and those are fully cooled right now. And then I'm using some of my home-pressed sunflower oil for part of this recipe. I did not use it for the entire thing just because it is quite strong. And so I used a tablespoon of my home-pressed sunflower oil. I have a video on that. I'll leave a link to that below. And then a couple tablespoons of olive oil for the dressing. And I have kind of an everyday olive oil I use for cooking, and then I have a better quality olive oil for things like this where I want to really taste it. A tablespoon and a half of fresh squeezed lemon juice. A tablespoon and a half of apple cider vinegar, and that apple cider is going to go really well with everything that's in there and brighten things up. And then some of my homemade Dijon mustard. I have a link to that below as well if you want to learn how to make your own homemade Dijon. And then you can use honey or maple syrup. I went with maple syrup in this recipe, tablespoon of that, some salt, some pepper, and that mustard is going to hold everything together and emulsify this dressing really well. So just give everything a good whisk so that it's thoroughly mixed and emulsified. And taste for seasoning, make sure you like it. And then that just goes on to everything. And Brussels sprouts are going to hold up well to that dressing. And so we've eaten leftovers of this for 2 or 3 days in the fridge, and it's totally fine. It's not like a lettuce where it's just going to melt to mush really quickly. So pour that over and just give everything a really good toss. This is so fresh and gorgeous, you guys. Really looks great on a holiday table. And that's all there is to it. I really love this recipe. We've made it twice, and I think you could easily substitute other things at other times of year. So give this recipe a try, Tribe. It's definitely worth making. Thanks for watching, Tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment, and share. I have new content coming out every week.